Hi there and welcome to the channel and to this, the June wrap, in which I reflect on both the quality and the quantity of the books I read this month. Now in terms of numbers, it was a typical month. I read 10 or so books, but in terms of quality, it was once again a stellar month. And we'll come onto the pile in a moment, but there are just two brief items of channel news I wish to touch upon. Firstly, I wish to thank the anonymous donor who purchased 10 coffees for the disappointed man. If anyone watching wishes to replicate this act of munificence, all you have to do is follow the link in the description, which will take you to buymeacoffee.com, and there you are free to give as much as you wish. Okay, and the second piece of channel news is actually just another thank you. It's to thank everyone for their comments in the previous month. It's been wonderful having some praise bestowed upon me for my efforts. It's sometimes very hard, sat here in my Taiwanese HQ, to keep making the videos for the channel, not knowing if they're really making any difference to the people watching. So hearing you say things like, oh, your English is so clear and so beautiful, or this video was really informative, really interesting, that is just great. It really gives me a buzz every time I read a comment of that type. All right, we are now ready to begin going through the pile as promised. So we start off with perhaps the greatest gap I had in my reading, apart from perhaps the Bible, which I have very little intention of trying to get to grips with. It is Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert. Incredible, really, that I'm so into French literature but had not read Flaubert's masterpiece. Well, that has now been rectified, and what can I say? It was excellent. A really supreme work of art. It very much reminded me of Tolstoy's Anna Karenina, although I have to say Tolstoy's novel tops Madame Bovary. And the reason for that is, although both novels are kind of idealistic in a way, and they show how people don't live up to their ideals, at least in Tolstoy's masterpiece, there are a few genuinely good characters who do approach their ideals in terms of how they live their lives. But in Madame Bovary, pretty much everyone is self-interested. You could argue that Charles is a good man, I suppose, and the wife of the innkeeper, and then there's Justin. But really, good characters are few and far between in what is a rather jaundiced look at humanity, but nevertheless beautifully written, and there's so many moments of sly humour in here too. So Madame Bovary, if you haven't read it, I do suggest at some point you pick it up. It undoubtedly deserves its status, yes, as a canonical work. Superb. Next we have another French novel, but this one I actually read in French. It's Jules Verne with his Journey to the Centre of the Earth. And this is really good, actually. Of the Jules Verne novels I've read, all of which have been in French, this is the best one so far, and I believe that's because it's narrated by a teenager. In here he's called Axel, but I believe he had a different name in the English edition, maybe even Harry, I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that, but he certainly wasn't called Axel. And he is narrating what's going on this adventure, which is led by his uncle, who's a very stern Teutonic scientist, and it's the interplay between Axel and his uncle that's excellent. Has to be said, Axel is rather French in the way he reacts to things, very sensitive and very emotional. So I really did enjoy Journey to the Centre of the Earth. You can read it in any language and enjoy it for yourself. And then moving on, we have Henry James's Washington Square, and I've just posted a video of this, which the YouTube algorithm has really decided not to smile upon, so it's barely had any views, despite the fact that it's an extremely professional performance from the disappointed man. It is actually one of the best videos I've managed to make recently. It's a shame no one's actually watching it. I guess it will have to be something of a sleeper. If you haven't watched it yet yourself and you're a dedicated follower of the channel, you may wish to consider doing so. This was an excellent novel. I really did enjoy it. On the back it says from Graham Greene that this approaches a Jane Austen novel. Oh, it's far better than a Jane Austen novel, it must be said. So if you want to know more, go and watch my video. Then something completely different. It is Sun and Steel by Yukio Mishima. And this is his kind of manifesto or personal testament on art, action, and ritual death. Brilliantly written, extremely clear, like all of his writing. The outstanding quality of his writing for me is its clarity, but what is it being very clear about? Well, it's this philosophy of muscle, and I have to say, as a flabby 50-something, I did not really identify with this philosophy, and I found it rather dangerous. It's rather reactionary. And the bit at the back where he's talking about his parachute jump really reminded me of Rex Warner's The Aerodrome, which I reviewed for the channel, and the words of the kind of fascist, basically, commander of the flight school. He really did replicate that kind of sentiment. So there's something rather disturbing about the philosophy that's being worked out here. I'm glad I'm reading it, as I say, as a 50-something. This is not the kind of book to put in the hands of an 18-year-old man. It could be linked with that kind of incel culture or stoicism that does proliferate in some corners of YouTube. So quite a dangerous book. And next we have this, Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Gambler, which I read in this Chicago Press edition. This was absolutely superb. A true explosion is what you'll find inside the pages of this book, because the plot hinges upon two imponderables, death and, of course, gambling, the turning of the roulette wheel. And so at any particular moment, the cast of characters who have a real carnival atmosphere about them are not sure quite what will happen next, and there are indeed a number of thunderbolts which strike them. And when that happens, there's this immediate reordering of all the relations among the various characters, the general, his mother, this aging grandmother. Then there's this French mademoiselle whose true identity no one is quite sure of, de Grue, a Frenchman who's hanging around, a little Russian prince, a hero who is a tutor to the general's children, and Paulina, who is the stepdaughter of the general. So it's fascinating watching them all scurrying about, trying to work out their next move. A novel quite unlike any other that I've read. So The Gambler, highly recommended. And I just wish to pick up on the carnivalesque atmosphere, because there's a Maupassant short story which is not connected with gambling but also has a carnival atmosphere, which is really good, and it is this one, Madame Telliers' Establishment. And this is about the inmates of a brothel, a house of ill repute, who go on a trip to a wedding of the Madame's relations, and it's just so funny the way this travelling party kind of turn everything on its head merely by their presence and their behaviour. So it does share some similarities with the world that Dostoevsky conjures up in The Gambler. It's only about 20 pages or so. So if you've read The Gambler and you want something a little similar, Maupassant, Madame Telliers' Establishment. Again, another great story from Maupassant. Then, well, to follow up The Gambler, I read Notes from Underground. This has various translations, doesn't it, of the title. It's sometimes called The Underground Man or Notes from the Underground. This one is a Norton Critical Edition, translated and edited by Michael R. Katz. I've got some other translations floating around. If you've got one you'd like to particularly recommend, you could do so in the comments. I have to say this wasn't as good for me as The Gambler, but it did feel like something the artist had to get out of their system before they could produce something far deeper. Yes, it has that feel that perhaps its value isn't so much intrinsic, but what it clears the way for, or what it allows to come to fruition. Yes, so I would say that is the chief attraction of this. Perhaps the strangest thing is that there's a very good attack on the notion of prostitution, and it goes into the evils of sex work. Now, I'm not one of these people that goes along with that idea that sex work is work, and Dostoevsky's character takes that view too, regarding it as a kind of slavery which sets it apart from all other types of labour. And what's strange is that he kind of disowns this most impassioned and, to me, sincere sounding speech of this short text and says, oh well, I was just saying that for effect because I couldn't take my revenge on my friends, and so I took my revenge on this poor prostitute, Liza. All right, so not as good as The Gambler for me, but still necessary reading. It's Dostoevsky, Notes from the Underground. Could not have more of a contrast, actually, because we now move over to Edith Wharton, writing what? Something like 25 years after Dostoevsky, but it's just a completely different world. I haven't read all of these short stories yet. It's in this beautiful Library of America edition. I did show this on the some suggestions for getting more from your reading video, so I won't go back through it all, but I'll just pick out once again The Angel at the Grave and The Duchess at Prayer, particularly The Duchess at Prayer. I'll see if I can find a free version of this text and put it in the description, put a link, because it was just such a magnificent horror story. You know, right up there with Poe, actually. Yes, excellent. So, strongly recommended. It was more diverse than I expected from Edith Wharton. I thought it would just be the same kind of milieu as one finds in Henry James's novels, novellas and short stories, but it was a bit more than that. And she's very good at writing about Italy. She's very good on Italy. Next, I've waved this around before because I've spent months reading it, understandably, but I've been dipping further into this Artaud collection. Now, if you're into William S. Burrows or Thomas Bernhard, you may find stuff in here that appeals to you. Sample sentence, people are blind, people are stupid. That was one which I thought Bernhard devotees might find up their street. And then there's a letter about the use of opium, which is basically identical with the kinds of letters that Burroughs wrote to the public health inspectors in America, urging them not to treat opioid addiction as a criminal problem, but as a public health problem. So, Burroughs or Bernhard, you may get something from this. There's one really good manifesto in here too called An End to Masterpieces, which I just want to read you a little from. This can be quite inspiring if you want to create art that just sweeps away everything that's gone before. 252 in this edition. Okay. I like this here. It says, oh, where is it? It is idiotic to blame the masses for having no sense of the sublime when we confuse the sublime with one of its formal manifestations, which are always dead manifestations. And if, for example, the modern mass audience no longer understands Oedipus Rex, I would go so far as to say that this is the fault of Oedipus Rex and not the fault of the audience. Okay, so it's giving you an argument for doing away with what's being done and doing it all over again. If in Shakespeare man is sometimes preoccupied by that which transcends him, ultimately it is always a question of the consequences of this preoccupation for man, that is, of psychology. And on it goes. So, if you're an artist making your way in the world and you're of the radical persuasion, this is a very good set of texts. All right. 2 more books, I believe, and these are literary theory, but I'll just show you so you have an idea what kinds of things I'm interested in. So first up we have Bakhtin with speech genres and other lay essays. And of particular interest for me was the titular article on speech genres. What this does is it sets all utterances within a communicative framework, which I'm kind of going to rely upon when I'm doing my teaching of composition at the university, to get students to start thinking about the fact that whenever you're writing or speaking, what you say, what you write is always shaped by your conception of who you are addressing. Yes, the question of addressivity. And basically what you find in Bakhtin is a theorization of how speech genres work. And it's quite sophisticated. It's his own terminology, but you can follow this quite easily, actually. And it is very beneficial for helping would-be scholars get into the practice of producing academic writing, because they often struggle because they're not really sure about who they're addressing. Okay, so I'll just focus on language as communication. And similarly, I have this one. Is There a Text in This Class by Stanley Fish. And this is in the same kind of area as Bakhtin, but he's not as specific in terms of his terminology. And what he argues is, while texts don't have a determinate meaning, that is, you can't just control what the text means. Critics can't just say it means this and it can't mean anything else. However, that doesn't mean that it can just mean anything at all, because we read texts as members of interpretive communities. That's his big idea. So, as you can kind of gather, it's rather similar to the notion of a speech genre. So, if you're interested in literary theory, these are two classics of that field. And that, ladies and gentlemen, concludes my June reading. All that remains is for me to choose my book of the month and then to bid you farewell. So, as regards the book of the month, it's a toss-up between Flaubert's Madame Bovary and Dostoevsky's The Gambler. But upon reflection, it's going to be The Gambler by Dostoevsky. Yes, this was absolutely superb. I cannot recommend this enough. If you've not read it, pick it up and give yourself a treat. So, The Disappointed Man's Book of the Month for June 2025 is Fyodor Dostoevsky's The Gambler. Okay, all that remains, as promised, is to bid you farewell in time-honoured fashion. So, until the next time, be safe, be strong, nanu nanu.